Welcome back. I'm Amy Henderson at Live in the Hall at the Georgia Municipal Association Annual Convention here in Savannah. This is our 80th convention, so we've been doing this a couple of years now. I feel like I've been here for about 60 of those, and this is only day one. Joining me is Luke Homer, who is the director of our local government services. And one of the services that GMA provides to cities is to help with their telecommunications and cable franchise negotiations. And we have a guest today who's going to talk about how those services worked in his city. So Lou, I'm going to turn it over to you to take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Amy. As Amy said, we at GMA have a program. We call it our Cable and Telecommunications Management Services. And we have operated this program since 1994, dealing with the cable and the telecommunications industry, which is sometimes not the most pleasant thing. But we provide a lot of expertise and knowledge to cities in this area. And today we have Ed Moon, who is the manager of West Point, who is with us, and his city is a member of our program. And this year we've done some work with them to help them with some franchise fee issues they've had with Knology. So Ed, you want to tell us a little bit about what was going on with Knology and how we helped you?
That they needed to make. And so we were able to call on GMA and your staff, and y'all were really crucial in the negotiations with Knology to get them to come through with the funds that were due to the city. Again, some of it was our fault, so it was a negotiation, which staff was very helpful in that area.
Well, it seems to me that when you're talking, right-of-ways and telecommunications and fibers and stuff like that, that it can be very technical, and that might be not something, that somebody, even with your expertise in other areas with the city, that might be something.
Right.
So you need somebody who, I guess, even speaks that language.
Sure.
Yeah. Ed, if I remember the whole situation right, Knology had just not been paying the franchise fees correctly. They had been paying not on all the different categories of revenue and not even paying you the correct percentage.
That's right.
So through a franchise fee audit, which we do as part of our program, that came out. But one thing I think was interesting about that is the sensitivity of Knology and West Point. I mean,
Right.
Knology's been around West Point since the late 1800s, if I remember,
That's right.
and y'all have
That's
a kind of a
There were telecommunications in the late 1800s.
they were actually
homegrown company.
Homegrown company. Tell us a little about that.
And certainly that was an interesting dynamic in the dealings with Knology.
Because you need to maintain that relationship.
Sure, and even though Knology has now been bought out by a company called WOW, which is Wide Open West, we still wanted to maintain that relationship. So again, in dealing with that, staff that had the ability, the understanding, and the knowledge to lead us through that with Knology, it was very successful.
Yeah. Amy, Greg Fender works with us with this program, and his company is called Local Government Services. And he and his son Ryan are the primary people that work with us with the program. And I tell you, Greg battles with these cable people day in and day out. And sometimes we have to take a really hard stance against the companies.
Right.
But in the case of West Point, Ed made it real clear to us that while they certainly wanted Knology to do the right thing, there were some sensitivities from a community perspective. So we had to make sure we were sensitive to that, but yet be an advocate for the city as well.
And Greg did a really good job of doing that. Actually, I had some local meetings there with just myself and the Knology management staff, which was very comfortable after Greg had prompted everyone in the right direction. So again, it worked very well.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've kind of back up, talk about franchise fees real quick so people understand what that is. That is basically rent that these companies pay for the use of the public's right-of-way.
Right.
So it's important, it's not that the city owns that property, those rights-of-way. That's the taxpayer's property, and they should be compensated for the use of it. So it's important that a city collect what is due for those taxpayers, because that money goes into the general budget, correct?
That's right. And I think the companies they understand that value, and certainly the community sees that. But I think the legislature's also shown that they understand the value in that by the new laws that have been passed.
That's great.
Yeah. And, dealing with the cable companies now compared to dealing with them back in 1994, back in the day, you had to deal directly with the company to negotiate agreements.
That's
and
right.
It was really very lengthy, protracted negotiations. And now in Georgia, we have a state franchising model, which still allows for local negotiations, which we do with some of the companies. But in Ed's case, Knology had gone to a state franchise, and they weren't doing the correct things under the state franchise.
Right.
That's right.
What are some of, I'm curious, what are some of the elements of a franchise agreement? Some standard things that are included in a franchise agreement?
Well, obviously there's the fee payment. That's
Right.
a very important component of it. There's also some customer service issues associated with the franchise. There's how the company behaves in your rights of way.
Okay.
And with the state franchising model, you have to have your own rights of way ordinance, and it has to be generally applicable to everyone that uses the right of way.
So does GMA help with cities to get that ordinance in place?
Yes, we do. As part of the cable program, we do that. And in many cases, a city will have an ordinance, but it'll be pretty old.
Right.
So we
Make
can
sure
use
that
our
it's modernized.
We'll use our model ordinance, which is really geared to help you deal with the cable and telecommunications companies under current law. And depending on how your city manages the right-of-way, some cities have engineers and different people that work with them, so those may be a little more complex, so we'll tailor those more to your particular needs.
And then come in and help you negotiate.
Right. And what was important to us, as I said, we had made an error in the fact that we had not notified the company that they owed
Right.
us 5%
Right.
instead of 3%.
So there was responsibility on the city's
Right.
behalf that had
so
not
when
been
the
carried.
audit was done and we caught that, then if we'd not done that audit, we just would have missed that revenue potentially from now on. So that was
And Amy,
important.
here's something interesting. Charter Communications also operates in West Point. They were paying 5%. So we don't understand why Knology didn't know the same thing.
Right.
The word hadn't gotten around yet.
Yeah. So Greg had to help Knology understand that, Charter can understand this, and we have our battles with Charter.
Right.
I can tell you.
Well, I can tell you. I remember when I years ago worked as a reporter that that was when you mentioned the customer service part of a franchise agreement, that was often a concern that people would bring to the local governments was the customer service. They weren't getting good customer service from their cable company, and I find it interesting. It isn't in the agreement. It's like a live person, or the phone must be answered after X number of rings if you try to call your cable company.
Well, that was the case when we had the local franchising.
Okay.
Under state franchising, they don't have to do quite as much. However, with the state franchise, if Ed's constituents aren't getting the proper service from the cable company, it's the city's responsibility still to work with the company. And as part of our program, Ed can just call Greg, and Greg deals with the issues associated with
that's
dealing
nice.
with the company.
So you don't have to waste time being the kneecap breaker.
right. Or entering into a conversation that I don't understand any of the language. So.
That to me is probably one of the biggest things. Is especially when it comes to these these technical issues, is they can throw out terms and words, and you have no idea what they're even, you have no frame of reference for what the conversation is, to even know if what they're telling you is true or not. So it does help to have somebody who speaks that same language.
Sure, and
on
understands
your side.
all the different pieces that they're paying on, those advertising pieces and things that Greg has the knowledge of that we certainly don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and has the knowledge of what's going on in other parts of the state.
Even if we looked at the audit, we would know if they were supposed to pay us for that or not.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll take your word for it. That doesn't work in city government, huh?
Right.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for being here. We
Sure.
appreciate you coming and sharing your story of how the I can't even say that word, telecommunications management services are working for y'all. We appreciate it very much.